and I'm going to pass this is Brent Abercrombie, the Indiana Regional Depository Coordinator, and I'm going to have Bert Chapman start and talk about U.S. Energy Information Administration Information Resources. So Bert, take it away.
Thank you very much, Brent and Lisa, and good wintry afternoon, everybody. In the last several months, we've come to realize how important energy is, particularly to our wallets. And so I want to introduce you to the multiplicity of resources that are freely available from the U.S. Energy Department's Energy Information Administration. So next. Okay, EIA's address is www.eia.gov. Next. So there are a lot of different pieces of background information about EIA. It's responsible for collecting, analyzing, and disseminating independent and impartial energy information to promote sound policymaking and various other objectives, including increasing public understanding of energy and its economic and environmental interaction. These I've just included some of the offices within its organizational components. The FY22 budget was approximately $126.8 million for this agency, and it has about 325 employees. Let me take you through a brief legislative history of it. Before 1974, energy-related statistics could often be produced by agencies like the Commerce Department, and the Interior Department, as well as some other agencies. But in 1974, the Federal Energy Administration was created by Public Law 93-275 to collect, assemble, evaluate, and analyze energy information. Then the modern EIA came about in 1977 from the Energy Department's Organization Act, which created what we now know as DOE, and it gave EIA independence within DOE and from other government agencies for data collection and report contents. Next. Okay, and in the ensuing 4.5 decades, there have been a lot of changes to what Congress has wanted a DIA to do. So, for instance, in 1992, under the Energy Policy Act, Congress wanted EIA to expand its data gathering and analysis in several areas, including energy consumption, alternative fuels, alternatively fueled vehicles, greenhouse gas emissions, fossil fuel transportation rates and distribution patterns, and various other areas. Then in 2005, under the Energy Policy Act, EIA was required to undertake new activities in the renewable fuels area, such as like conducting an inventory of renewable fuels available for consumers, projecting future inventory, studying renewable fuel blending, and various other things. Then in 2007, as part of the Energy Independence and Security Act, they required EIA to prepare a 5-year plan to enhance the quality and scope of its data collection and to assess state data needs. And it also required EIA to prepare a semi-annual analysis of planned refinery outages and their impact on the petroleum product supply and price. Then this past year, in its congressional budget request, EIA wanted funding to expand its residential energy consumption survey to collect and publish household energy use for Puerto Rico and other populated U.S. territories, to modernize the national energy policy system, modeling system, to address what they see as a transitional nature of energy involving renewable penetration and decarbonization scenarios, publish materials on wind and solar generation and that should be hybrid solar and battery projects, and information to support federal responses to unforeseen energy disruptions and natural disasters. Next slide. So lots of the agencies we get statistics from have individuals send out surveys to different individuals and organizations to fill out. And so this is all the categories of all the surveys EIA sends out, and you'll notice they cover quite a significant waterfront of energy-related topics. Next. So here's some I selected just covering the energy consuming end use sector. And some of these are done every 4 years. So there's one category for residential energy consumption survey, another for manufacturing energy consumption, and then a third for commercial buildings energy consumption. Next. And so the residential energy consumption survey has 4 different forms you can fill out. And there's also a separate one for a multi-family building study. And they also give you the contact information of the individual at EIA who's responsible for administering that survey. Next. So Form 457A for the residential energy consumption survey tops the scales at 110 pages. And you'll notice all the different categories to the left side of the screen where home energy users will be questioned. So it can include appliances, electronics, various kinds of heating, thermostats, energy bills, and the like. They estimate it'll take you 32 minutes to fill this particular form out. Next. So here's category for appliances. So and they mentioned the number of refrigerators category has been changed since 2015. So they asked how many refrigerators are plugged in and turned on in your home? And they explain the different kinds you should include. And then they also want to know the size of your refrigerator. Next. Then the ever popular electronics. How many televisions are used in your home? And then this is for television. What's the size of your most used television? And so gives various measurements. And next. EIA puts out a lot of prominent publications. One of the most prominent ones is the Annual Energy Review, which is published annually, and it's been around for multiple decades in various forms. So they have data categories such as energy overview, energy consumption by sector, financial indicators, energy resources, and then getting into specific energy commodities such as petroleum and related liquids, natural gas, and coal. Next. So here's a category, energy consumption by sector. So they have primary energy consumption by source and sector, and these are available. So these are available in PDF. And then there's another category called energy consumption estimates by sector, and this will be broken down by residential, commercial, and industrial sectors. And this can include formats of PDF, Excel, as well as CSV and interactive. Next. So here's breakdowns for energy consumption by residential, commercial, and industrial sectors. It goes all the way back to 1950. And you can see 2021 on the screen. I can't remember the exact date of this. So you can, like for residential, you can have breakdowns by electricity, electric system, energy losses, and also for commercial and industrial sector end users. And these are broken down monthly. So you can check out what times have more heavily or lighter uses of energy in these various sectors. Next. Okay. The Annual Energy Outlook is another flagship publication from EIA, and it takes current energy traditions or energy conditions and projects them out usually a few decades into the future. So in this case, for the Annual Energy Outlook of 2022, that came out in March of last year. They're projecting out through 2050, and they're available. They have a video from YouTube you can consult, and there's also a PDF and PowerPoints. Next. So some of the takeaways from the references contend petroleum and natural gas will remain the most consumed energy sources in the US through 2050, but renewable energy is the fastest growing. They also contend wind and solar incentives, along with falling technology costs, support robust competition with natural gas for electricity generation, while shares of coal and nuclear to power decrease in the US electricity mix. They also maintain that US crude oil production reaches record highs, while natural gas production is increasingly driven by natural gas exports. Next. So here they're talking about natural gas consumption rising, mostly because of industrial use and exports. And so they have breakdowns by commercial, residential, transportation. And then they also have changes in natural gas disposition and net exports. And then they're projecting that out to 2050. Next. Coal. and they'll have different categories here, such as an overview, specific data, and then analysis and projection. So they mentioned most coal is mined in the West, but most coal mining jobs are to the east. And then they say that nearly a quarter of the operating U.S. coal-fired fleet scheduled to retire. And then they mentioned some other factoids as well, along with visual analytics. Next. So here's coal consumption by end use sector. These are going to be broken down into quarterly quadrants. I probably should have done a better job of getting the data at the descriptions at the top of the page. Next. So consumption and efficiency. This is covering overall energy consumption and efficiency. So they mentioned U.S. natural gas bills will increase in all regions this winter, which is not surprising. I think this report may have been prepared in November. And then residential and commercial natural gas prices will reach multi-year highs. Also, I'm more happy to note that mentioned U.S. commercial buildings continue to increase their energy efficiency. Next. So here's some energy consumption estimates by sector using trillions of British thermal units. And so they're talking about breakdowns, for the residential, commercial, industrial, and transportation sectors, as well as a overall primary total. Next. Then they mentioned as far as the residential energy consumption survey, that in 2020, most U.S. households prepared at least one hot meal a day at home. And so this gives you a breakdown of how many prepared 3 or more hot meals a day, and then breakdowns for the rest of the week. Next. There's also focus on specific commodities such as electricity. So they mentioned U.S. electricity customers experienced, I think, 7 hours of annual power interruptions between 2013 and 2021. They also mentioned one of the largest wind farms in the U.S. was completed in Oklahoma, and some other factoids as well. Next. Here's the U.S. electricity customers average 7 hours of power interruptions in 2021. And so here's more information about that. And this comes from EIA's annual electric power industry report. And they also mention how this can affect what may happen if there are major events like snowstorms, hurricanes, or wildfires. And that the average duration of interruptions can run around 2 hours per year. So next. And so here's a total of average electric power interruption and duration and frequency by customer by state. So it looks like, unfortunately, if you live in Louisiana, that's the state that's most frequently hit by such problems. And then we can go to the next slide. So here's look at in November of hourly electricity demand, net generation, and total interchange for the lower 48 states. And then the second chart has hourly net generation by energy source for the United States. So you can see breakdowns by wind, solar, hydro, petroleum, natural gas, coal, and nuclear. And then there's another table on the right. Next. Gasoline and diesel fuel. This gives you, for a couple of weeks in November, regular gasoline prices per gallon. The U.S. is broken down into different, there's overall national price ranges, and then the U.S. is broken down into what are called petroleum area defense districts. So the Midwest is in Petroleum Area Defense District, or PAD 2. So they give you the prices here. Now there can be differences between prices in these districts. Next slide, please. Okay, here's an example of what we pay for a gallon of gasoline. This is in October 2022. They'll give the regular price for retail gasoline and then also for diesel gasoline. And we need to remember with diesel gasoline, that is what brings a lot of groceries and other consumer products to market. And so that's why there's been, you'll notice there's a significant price differential between gasoline and diesel. So that's one of the reasons why prices have gone up. And then they have breakdowns by how much it costs to produce the gasoline, the refining, and distributing and marketing, as well as taxes. Next slide. So here's information about diesel fuel. It was invented by a German in the 19th century named Rudolf Diesel. And so again, it tells what kinds of product or vehicles have or use diesel fuel. And besides that, it also mentions many industrial facilities, large buildings, hospitals, and electric utilities have diesel generators for backup and emergency power supply. Next slide. So here's natural gas. They mentioned, and EIA's coverage is not only by US states, but also nationally and internationally. So they mentioned natural gas production and consumption's increase in Egypt, the importance of natural gas imports from Canada to the US. And they also mentioned US natural gas disposition increased in 2021 and was export driven. Next. So here's about natural gas imports from Canada providing winter reliability to US markets. And you can see how the trade in billion cubic feet per day from January of 2000 to August of 2022. Next. And here's a listing of, as of November 30th, select spot prices for delivery that particular day. And so you can see how much particular prices may have gone up or down, depending on market conditions. Next. So this is a image map of energy infrastructure and resources for our part of the country and some of the some surrounding states. And so you can see, there's plenty around Indiana or Indianapolis. Let's go to the next slide. I'm excited to focus on the 117th Congress for the 4th Congressional District, which is represented by our Congressman, my Congressman Jim Baird. So, and this gives you a little variety of the types of facilities that are here. There's a Benton County Wind Farm. Benton County is a rural county just northwest of Lafayette. And so they have a wind turbine there. There are a lot of wind turbines in that county. And this is located in the community of Earl Park, and it lists who the name of the company, Orion Energy Group, that owns it. Then in Norway, Indiana, they're at Monticello in White County, there's a NIPSCO, Northern Indiana Public Service Company, and they give the capacity of that facility. Then there's a dairy at Fair Oaks up in Jasper, which many of you should be familiar with. Then the next slide. Okay, there are all kinds of energy disruptions which can impact energy supplies and delivery. And so they provide reference to a US Energy Atlas for web map applications and geospatial data. So they break down into categories of hurricanes, cyclones, and typhoons, then flooding, and then wildfires. Next. So here's just some areas they're talking about where there could be potential energy disruptions for flooding. And they use National Weather Service data for severe thunderstorms, tornadoes, flash floods, and special marine warnings. Next. So here's an example of some flooding. This, again, just describes what the sources of that information, again, from the National Weather Service and from NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. They mentions the National Hurricane Center data feed gives information on positions, tracks, tropical depressions, tropical storms, etc., as warning for watches for tropical storms and hurricanes. Next. So continuing back to commodities, there's nuclear and uranium. So they mentioned daily US summer nuclear capacity outages were 19% lower this summer. And nuclear power provided about 10% of California's total electricity supply. Energy production can decline by record amounts in several states in 2020. That's going to be pandemic related. Next. So here's some data about production of uranium concentrate in the United States for recent years, and it comes from a EIA publication called the quarterly Domestic Uranium Production Report. Next. So here's the status of US nuclear outages, and this is located in various areas. There's an area, I think this was in November this past year. There, you know, in North Carolina, there's an area that's in black, and that it's a 100% category because there was some kind of outage of power plants in North Carolina. I don't know if they ever figure out what caused it. I think there was some concern. There may have been some man-made sabotage to it, but I'm not sure what the ultimate result of that was. Next slide. Now, they also provide names of a lot of different power plants, nuclear power plants across the US, and they list what the plant's output is, their outage and capacity is. Next slide. There's a plant called the Donald C. Cook Company. Now, this is physically located in Michigan, but it's owned by Indiana and Michigan Electric Company and supplies many Indiana customers. So this gives what they're generating or megawatt generation was for 20 years between 02 and 22. Next slide. Turn to commodities, petroleum and other liquids. So they mentioned real gasoline prices this past Thanksgiving were relatively unchanged. But residential heating oil prices are starting higher, and propane prices were in October were fairly similar to last year. Next. So here's some data on various crude oil products and their pricing. So where it says crude oil, where it says WTI, it means West Texas Intermediate. Brent, I think, is from the North Sea, and then there's Louisiana Light. So they give price distribution, and then they also give price wholesale prices at various harbors, how much heating oil is, as well as low sulfur diesel and propane. Next. So this is the weekly petroleum status report, and there'll be highlights and there'll be things such as stocks of crude oil by PADD district, motor gasoline and fuel ethanol by PADD district, imports of crude oil and total products by PADD district, and various other things. Next slide. So Indiana is in the Midwest PADD2 district and covers all these states. I learned about how much difference there can be in prices in the summer of 21 when Becky and I traveled out to Montana and Wyoming and Idaho for our district. When we were in Montana, the prices were lower, but when we got to Idaho, we got to a state that was in the West Coast region of the petroleum area for a defense district, and gas prices there at that time were about 30 cents a gallon higher than they were in Montana or Wyoming. Next. EIA also does a number of different analytical studies. This is one called Midwest and Rocky Mountain Transportation Fuels Markets. Next. And so here's the table of contents. They discuss different regions, and they also talk about supply and demand, refinery supply and logistics, and supply vulnerability and various fuel specifications. Next. There's obviously in the last decade or so, there's been a lot of emphasis on renewable and alternative fuels. So they mention some different statistics that are available on this subject area. Next slide. So here's information on renewable consumption between 2015 and 2018, breakdowns by hydroelectric, geothermal, solar, and various other renewable categories. Next. Then there's information from 2017 on alternative fuel vehicle data. So they list breakdowns by fuel vehicle inventory fleet and type. So the federal government's gone the most into it, the most by far as of this time, then state governments or state agencies, fuel providers, and transit agencies. And so they have breakdowns by the type of fuel that's being used on the right side next to the state agencies category. Next. And they mentioned one of the largest wind farms in the US was completed in Oklahoma last spring. And so they'll show where the farm is, and they tell you about its capacity, and that it has 356 wind turbines. Next. EIA also covers the world. And there are a lot of different categories you can use to find information about energy geopolitics, the energy resources and policies of various countries. Next slide. So this is, there's up at the top, if you're on the website, you can click to track changes in global energy production rankings from 1980 to 2019. So this is covering energy production from 2019. China ranks first, the US ranks second, Russia third, Saudi Arabia fourth, and Canada fifth. And this is in quadrillion British thermal units, or BTUs. Next. So here's Russian production for petroleum and other units. And you'll notice from starting with March of 2022, there was a slight downtick, then an uptick in their petroleum production. The refinery processing stays static. Then next. So here's a list of all the countries and regions and topics you can choose from if you want to find information about other countries or international other countries' energy policies or international energy matters. Next. So this is the one for China. There's a full report, and these reports can maybe be 15, 20 pages. So they mentioned, of course, China is the most populous country in the world and has a fast-growing economy. It's also the largest energy consumer and producer in the world, and we expect that China's energy demand will continue to increase. So they give some overall economic data, including mentioning the COVID pandemic. Then they have a chart broken down of primary energy consumption by fuel type in China for 2021. And you notice that coal with 55% is by far the largest category of Chinese energy consumption. Next. So here's a listing of China's crude oil imports by source. And so it's kind of a pizza pie chart, but you notice that 50% of their imports come from the Middle East, and then they have breakdowns by individual countries, with Saudi Arabia being at the top of the heap. Next. Then there are also important global regions of the world that are major trade routes and also provide energy. So this is the South China Sea, and it covers an extensive geographic area from Singapore to Taiwan, and it's an area where China has sought to reclaim some land from the water, which has been subject to a heated international dispute with many surrounding countries. There also are believed to be significant oil and natural gas resources in the South China Sea. Next slide. So here's again a parameter of the South China Sea, and you can see a number of significant countries are in this region. And the EIA estimates the South China Sea contains about 11 billion barrels of oil and 190 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. So we can go to the next slide. World oil transit choke points are also very important in many areas around the world, because about 61% of the world's global petroleum and other liquids production move on maritime routes. The top two choke points are the Strait of Hormuz and the Strait of Malacca by volume of oil transit. So there's some different statistics in here. Next slide. So here's some of the world transit choke points and how they've ranked in recent years by a million barrels per day. So for instance, Strait of Hormuz increased from delivering 17 million barrels per day in 2011 to 18 and a half in 2016. And then there's some other areas here. And some you might be surprised, like with the Danish Straits, Turkish Straits. So it's quite a significant arena of geographic coverage. Next. So, and these, a lot of this oil is being carried on very large ships. So for instance, they give you information on 1,000 deadweight metric tons. So you know, this one where it says ultra large crude carrier at the bottom, it's between 320 and 550 deadweight crude tons. So they're being carried on huge products, huge containers. They need large and deep ports to be able to load and unload their cargo. And so that impacts all kind of conditions in the countries hosting these ports. Next. So this is a map of the Strait of Hormuz. This has been a sensitive global region as long as I can remember back. You go back to the Strait of Hormuz. Yeah, this has been a sensitive global region as long as I can remember because of the neighborhoods in Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, and various other Arabian Peninsula countries. Next slide. This is the Strait of Malacca, and it includes countries like Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, traffic and southeast of India, traffic going between China and other regions of the world, and ultimately going to the Americas as well. Then in March of 21, a ship was caught in a sandstorm, and it was a marooned, you could say, for 6 days. In March 2021, the Suez Canal and the Suez Mediterranean pipeline was blocked. So consequently, 396 ships were backed up. And I've seen different sources on the estimated trade loss. One I saw, I think it may have been, I can't remember, it was the US Trade Representative's office. So it was, trade loss was $9.6 billion. So, I mean, these ships they're carrying energy commodities are running on timetables, and any kind of interruption really messes things up. Next slide. So coming back to the US, there's a number of resources about US energy conditions in individual states. There's a state energy data system, which is their source for comprehensive state energy statistics. And so you have things such as consumption, prices, and expenditures and production information. Next. So this is Indiana's quick profile. It mentions Indiana's the 6th largest ethanol producer in the country. The ethanol plants produce about 1.3 gallons of fuel ethanol per year, about 7% of the nation's total. And then they mention some other factoids. The Whiting refinery can process about 435,000 barrels of crude oil per calendar day, and it's the largest inland oil refinery in the country. And there are only 5 US refineries, 3 in Texas and 2 in Louisiana, that can process more crude oil. They also mentioned wind power provided 8% of Indiana's total electricity net generation in 2021, but with solar, biomass, and hydropower accounting for less than 2%. Next. These are Indiana energy consumption estimates for 2020. Again, natural gas is in the lead, and coal is in second. Next. This is a listing of prices in August of 22 for domestic crude oil. Indiana was about $5.18 below the national average. And then natural gas, coal, and electricity prices. So now in industrial electricity, Indiana was above the national average, but for some of these it was below. Next. And so here's a listing of reserves. Indiana doesn't have any crude oil reserves or dry natural gas reserves. There's some coal reserves and some crude oil refinery capacity, as you can see. Next. And then these are the number of fueling stations. So there's 2,790 traditional motor gas stations, representing 2.5% of the US share as of 2019, 44 propane stations, 311 electricity stations, 242 E85 stations, and 28 compressed natural gas and alternative fuel stations. Then the sources of energy used for home heating, natural gas ranks number one at 58.7%. Then electricity is second at 30.8%, and fuel oil is only 0.5%. Now, if you're in the northeastern US, that would be a much different matter. Next. So here's kind of a description. They give some geographic description of Indiana and its distance. And they mentioned it was once covered by inland seas, but the geological layers beneath the Indiana surface contain fossil fuel resources, mainly coal, but also crude oil and natural gas. They have information about the plains and glaciation in the northern part of the state. And we all know Indiana has a varied climate. And then they mentioned the industrial sector is the state's largest energy consuming sector, accounting for almost half of its total energy consumption. And there are various other characteristics of Indiana's energy equation. Next. There's also a regional dashboards and data. So you can find information about New England's energy dashboard, particularly the importance of fuel oil. There are Southern California's daily energy report, energy disruptions, the Gulf of Mexico, the petroleum area defense districts, as well as the information on regional transportation fuel market reports. Next. So this is a New England dashboard. And so as of November 30th, this was their capacity and the normal, their peak demand and various other categories. They have some nuclear energy use as well. And then there's some other things on pricing. Next. And so they're mentioning distillate stocks in US, New England, Central Atlantic states fall to low levels. This was in September of last year. I'm not sure how that's played out in the last few months. They mentioned this is like fuel oil stocks at refineries, bulk terminals, and natural gas plants in the United States were the lowest in several years as of June 22. And they mentioned it's primarily used as transportation fuel and trucks, but it's also used for home heating in New England states. And so they give different breakdowns of what the stocks were in the New England states as of June of this year. Next. Then there's also some information about energy for kids on the EIA webpage. So they have some different categories here you can choose from. They have some teacher's guides for various grades. Next. So here's again from the kids section, the information on energy use basics, energy in the environment, home and commercial and industrial and transportation energy use. And so you can find out how much your computer or MP3 uses in terms of energy. Next. And here's a talking about how we use energy in homes. And they talk about how important lighting is and how what once were the incandescent bulbs invented by Edison have been transitioned to incandescents, fluorescence, and LED bulbs. And they mentioned some legislation that was responsible for that, as well as for the other appliances we use in our homes or at work. Next. So here's some things EIA listed as its accomplishments in 21. They published an interactive mapping tool showing U.S. energy infrastructure disruptions and technology. That's part of the U.S. Energy Atlas. They released analysis of how carbon fees could potentially reduce energy-related carbon dioxide emissions. And then they also released an update on a U.S. Battery storage report, and that's linked to from there. Next. I've been interested in the EIA a long time. In the early years of my career, I actually wrote an article for the journal Serials Review on serial publications produced by this agency. Next. There are a number of other places you can use to find information about EIA. In the House, the Energy and Commerce Committee, Natural Resources Committee have some jurisdiction and interest in EIA materials, and the Appropriations committee subcommittee on the Energy Department is they're going to be their funding authority. Or funding provider, I should say. On the Senate side, there's a Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, and then the House Appropriations Committee Subcommittee on Energy. You can find information on EIA from the Congressional Research Service and Government Accountability Office reports, and in Energy Department Inspector General reports. Next. So I think there are a lot of benefits you can gain from EIA resources. They're an authoritative information source on U.S. domestic and international energy spanning multiple decades. They provide authoritative information on energy sector developments, prices, and trends in areas such as coal, electricity, natural gas, nuclear, petroleum, and renewable energy. They provide detailed information on residential and commercial energy consumption, provide coverage of geopolitical trends and developments affecting and potentially affecting energy supply, demand, delivery, and the supply chain. EIA people and personnel frequently testify for Congress on energy developments. It's suitable for multiple age levels, and I will look forward to your questions.
Thanks, Bert, for your presentation there. Had a little bit of trouble getting the mute button done. I don't see any questions right now. I think you did an excellent job of
Thank you.
Taking a deep dive on this website. Oh, we do have one coming in from Andrea. The security of the electrical grid has been in the news. How would you find energy security issues on EIA.gov?
You'd probably want to check in stuff on the electricity energy, but there would be other places you want to check. Homeland Security would come into that. Other branches of the Energy Department would. There's also an agency within the Energy Department called the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which regulates transmission of interstate energy commodities like natural gas and electricity.
All right, good question.
And you'd obviously want to check if there's like congressional legislation and committee hearings on electric grid security.
Andrea noted that there are some good definitions in the glossary, and that's always helpful on a government website to just understand what the terms mean that are frequently used on it. So, any more questions for Bert? If not, I'm gonna ask Lisa to turn off the recording and we can wrap up. So, last call. All right, Lisa, if you could stop the recording.